Welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're going way back in time.
Oh, yeah. How far back are we talking?
Back to the ancient Israelites.
Fascinating period.
We're looking at excerpts from the book of Leviticus, chapter 6 specifically.
Okay, and what's the focus in this chapter?
It's all about offerings and atonement.
A central theme in many religions. What's unique about the Israelite perspective?
Well, for them, it wasn't just about saying sorry.
It was more than that.
Oh, yeah. This was about taking action. Rituals,
Very interesting.
It's part of the Torah, their central text. It's got some really specific instructions on how to make things right when you've, messed up. I'm intrigued, to be honest, by how detailed it gets.
Yeah, these ancient practices really offer us a glimpse into their beliefs about sin, forgiveness, their relationship with God.
That's what I find fascinating.
It wasn't just about saying, I'm sorry. It was about what you did, what actions you took.
Right. What stood out to me was the section about dishonesty.
Dishonesty. A timeless issue.
And it's not talking about little white lies here.
It gets more serious than that.
Oh, way more. This is deception, stealing, extortion.
Those are some serious offenses.
The kind that really has consequences.
And how did they approach these acts in Leviticus?
They call them trespass.
Trespass.
It means like a deliberate violation, not just an accident. And to atone, you had to do more than just return what was taken.
More? What else did they have to do?
They had to add an extra fifth of the value on top of it.
An extra fifth? Wow, that seems like a pretty hefty penalty. Why do you think that was?
It's interesting, right? It suggests that simply returning the stolen goods wasn't enough. Like, it wasn't enough to just make things even.
They felt something more was needed.
For them, true atonement meant going above and beyond to fix the harm.
That's a really interesting perspective, almost like a form of early punitive damages, adding another layer of consequence.
Yeah, almost like they wanted to really make you understand that dishonesty has some serious repercussions. Makes you think about how our ideas of justice and accountability have evolved over time. But, all these rules about offerings, they got me thinking about where all this was happening.
Wow, the setting.
The text mentions the altar and the ever-burning fire a lot. What's the significance of that?
Well, the altar was the central point of their whole sacrificial system, and that fire, always burning, was a symbol of God's presence. Keeping it going constantly signified their devotion, their connection to the divine. Unwavering.
Unwavering.
Yeah.
I guess every element had some kind of symbolic meaning then, even down to what the priests wore and how they got rid of the ashes.
Oh, absolutely. Every detail was deliberate. The priests were intermediaries between the people and God, right?
Yeah.
So their role was to make sure all those rituals were performed perfectly, to make those offerings acceptable to God.
So their clothing, how they handle the ashes.
All of it, all part of making the process sacred, maintaining the purity. It shows how crucial that connection was to them.
So it wasn't just about going through the motions.
No. It was about performing these rituals with care, precision.
And there's a whole section on grain offerings, too.
Ah.
Fine flour, oil, frankincense, a specific recipe.
These were all about expressing gratitude, devotion to God.
So what happened to these offerings?
Most of it was burned on the altar, a pleasing aroma, but a portion that was reserved for the priests to eat. But even then, there were very particular rules about how they could consume it.
Right. Like it had to be eaten unleavened and in a holy place, right?
In a very specific place.
Yeah.
Within the courtyard of the meeting tent, it emphasized the sacredness of the food.
And the special relationship between the priests and God, right?
Absolutely. Not just a meal, a symbolic act of communion. It's like a reminder that for them, the sacred wasn't confined.
It was everywhere.
In every part of their lives.
And even within the grain offerings, there were different rules for different priests.
Oh, yes.
The high priest's offering had to be burned completely. No snacking for him.
The high priest held a unique position. He entered the Holy of Holies.
The most sacred space.
Once a year on the Day of Atonement. This difference in offerings reflects that elevated status, underscoring the hierarchy within the priesthood itself.
So the offerings weren't a one-size-fits-all thing.
No, not at all. They varied. It depended on the person, their position within the priesthood. The whole system was highly structured to maintain that right relationship with God. It's a glimpse into a worldview very different from ours.
With some fascinating parallels.
We've only just scratched the surface, though.
There's a lot more to unpack. Sure.
Like the sin offerings, for example.
Ah, yes, the heavy stuff.
They had very specific rules about those, especially about where you slaughter the animal. The location really mattered.
All about location, location, location.
We'll dive into those details in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back! I don't know about you, but I'm finding all this so fascinating.
Me too. These ancient texts, they really give you a different perspective, like stepping back in time. But, even though these rituals are so old, some of the ideas, well, they still feel relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. We've been talking about offerings, but they're really just one part of this bigger concept.
Oh, you mean atonement?
Exactly. Yeah. Atonement, what it meant for the Israelites, well, it's pretty profound.
So how do they see this whole process of making things right with God, I mean?
It was about repairing a relationship that had been broken by sin. It wasn't just about, feeling bad about what you did.
There was more to it.
They had to take real action, concrete steps to fix that relationship.
So less about internal guilt and more about external actions.
You got it. For them, atonement was this combination of, restitution and sacrifice.
You can give me an example.
Sure. Like if someone committed a trespass.
Like the stealing and defrauding we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. First, they had to return what they took, plus that extra fifth.
Right, that extra penalty.
Yeah.
But even then it wasn't over.
Not quite. They also had to offer up a ram as a guilt offering.
A ram.
Okay.
So the offering was a way to, acknowledge what they did.
And to seek forgiveness from God. It wasn't enough to just make things right with the person they wronged.
It was about making it right with God, too.
Yes. The offering was symbolic, an act of appeasement, a way to acknowledge they messed up, express that remorse, and try to restore that balance in their relationship with God.
And I'm assuming the type of offering mattered, like whether it was a burnt offering, a grain offering, or a sin offering. It depended on what they did wrong.
Exactly right. Different offerings for different sins. It shows how nuanced their understanding of transgressions was. Each act had a specific way to atone for it.
Okay, so that brings us back to the sin offerings. What were those all about?
These were serious business, reserved for the most serious offenses, the ones that really messed up the community's relationship with God.
And the blood of the sin offering, that was a key part, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It represented life itself, a powerful symbol.
I remember you saying something about the location for slaughtering the animal being important.
Yeah. Yes, very important. It had to be done in the same place as the burnt offering, right before the Lord.
Right before the Lord, to emphasize how serious it was.
Exactly. Emphasize the gravity of sin, the importance of seeking atonement directly from God, not just going through the motions.
And there were all those rules after, too, about who could eat the sin offering, where they could eat it, how to clean the tools they used. So much detail.
Ritual purity. That was super important for them. Everything connected to the sin offering had to be handled with extreme care.
To avoid contaminating the process.
Exactly. Any impurity could disrupt the whole thing.
This idea of purity comes up a lot. What did it actually mean for them?
Purity, both ritual and moral. It was fundamental to their relationship with God.
It wasn't just about their actions.
It was about a state of being, spiritual cleanliness. And atonement played a huge role in achieving that purity.
So the offerings, washing their clothes, even how they got rid of the ashes, it was all about cleansing themselves.
And getting rid of that stain of sin, restoring that connection with the divine. It was like hitting a reset button, in a way.
A spiritual reset button, I like that. But what about when things went really wrong? Like if that blood from the sin offering got into the meeting tent, the holiest place.
That was a huge deal. It signified that the transgression, it was so bad, it threatened their whole connection to the divine. A complete violation.
And the atonement for that.
It had to be extraordinary, a complete destruction. Even the priests, they couldn't eat this offering.
No one could.
Well,
but the priests usually ate parts of the other offerings.
This one was different. It highlighted that no one was above the law. Not even the priests.
Not even the priests. Wow. It all sounds so intentional.
It was. They truly believed that their actions directly affected their relationship with God. And it wasn't just about avoiding punishment either. Atonement was about purification for the individual and the whole community.
A collective purification.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it wasn't just about avoiding the consequences. It was about cleansing themselves of sin.
Yes. Think of it like a spiritual reset button for everyone. All those rituals, the washing, the careful disposal. It was all symbolic of that purification process, getting rid of anything impure.
It's amazing how much we can learn from these ancient practices. It's a completely different worldview.
It is. But even though their rituals are so different from anything we do today, those basic human needs,
The need for forgiveness, for reconciliation.
those are timeless. And they're still with us. We might not have those elaborate sacrifices anymore, but we still have that deep desire to make things right.
To find that sense of peace and wholeness. But I think that's a conversation for another time.
We've covered so much ground already. It's a lot to take in, and there's still more to explore.
Back again for part 3 of our Leviticus deep dive. It's chapter 6 if you're just joining us. Thinking about all these offerings and this whole system of atonement, it really makes you realize the power of rituals.
It really is amazing how these ancient practices, they give us a glimpse into a whole other way of seeing the world, It wasn't just going through the motions for them.
No, not at all.
Every little thing had meaning, every action, the ingredients, even the location, all of it was packed with symbolism.
That's what gets me, that intentionality. Like every detail mattered. It's almost like a carefully choreographed dance.
A dance, yeah. And if you miss a step, the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. And it really highlights how important it was for them to get it right.
Oh, absolutely. To perform the rituals exactly as prescribed. If they messed up, it could mess up the whole atonement process, that whole idea of getting right with God.
And that makes me think about the priests. What was their role in all of this?
They were critical. They were the ones who knew the rules, the laws, and how to make sure the offerings were done correctly. The keepers of the knowledge, you could say.
So they were like spiritual advisors,
Yeah.
guiding people through the whole atonement thing.
Yeah, and teachers. They had to explain those laws to everyone.
And make sure everyone understood how to make amends when they messed up.
Exactly. But remember, this wasn't just about individual people. It was about the whole community.
Right. We talk about how sin could impact everyone, not just the person who did it.
It affected their relationship with God, collectively.
So these rituals, they weren't just for personal piety. They were about keeping the community strong and connected.
Exactly. It was a way to reinforce their shared beliefs and deal with wrongdoing together. Repair that relationship with God as a whole group.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How these ancient practices, they offer a window into a totally different way of life. But even though we don't do animal sacrifices or any of that today, do you think there are still, echoes of those needs in the modern world?
That's a really interesting question. I think those core desires, they're timeless. The need for forgiveness, for reconciliation, to belong. We might express it differently now, but it's still there.
So maybe things like community service, apologies, even fighting for justice. Maybe those are all modern ways of trying to achieve atonement, of trying to make things right.
It's definitely something to think about. And as we wrap up our exploration of Leviticus, I hope this has given you a new perspective, a sense of wonder at how people have sought to connect with something bigger than themselves, and how they tried to find peace, to find that sense of wholeness.
Me too. This whole journey through chapter 6 has been eye-opening, and it's definitely given me a lot to ponder. Thanks for joining us for this Leviticus deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking those big questions.